Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Mel Reyes. He is the CEO at Elite Technical Concierge and recovering CIO and CISO. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Pete.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Yeah, so I've spent the last 3 decades working through pretty much every function in IT, sliding over into security. And now I work with the executives and their teams to get them through the dramas and the traumas, focusing on IT and cybersecurity, but also CFOs and CEOs to kind of build out the culture that is psychologically safe, which is a very key focus for me these days.
Great to hear. What aspects in your mind roll into that to make a culture of a company psychologically safe?
Believe it or not, inclusivity, diversity are key, but also making sure you've got the right training to understand how to keep your teams motivated, how to get that message down so that everyone's in the mix to see how they're impacting the business, but also to make sure you're actually listening to and kind of creating a culture within each of the teams that marry up to the core values of the business. So there's quite a few different frameworks that I've pulled together under one umbrella to be able to do that, depending on the size of the company and everything else. And most of it is executive or senior leadership training on how to manage teams and kind of how to identify things. The reason I've been focusing a lot on psychological safety is in cybersecurity, right? Because of the immense pressure, it's really hard to try to pull together the time and be purposeful about the time that you want to be able to allocate to doing these kind of things. So that's a huge message with everything from Mind Over Cyber and Cyber Minds with a Z, and a lot of the other programs that I'm really, really hoping to publicize out there, plus the kind of training that's needed from someone like myself.
Awesome. Yeah. I think these days, especially in this economy or hiring environment, whatever you want to call it, doing more with less seems to be the order of the day. So I could see where that might cause some undue or extra stress or strain on a lot of teams that, traditionally would not have been strained. Is that kind of what you're seeing in the market right now as well?
Yes. So there's a huge push that I'm seeing with companies, their budget, risk acceptance, and kind of the ability to be able to retain talent, right? One through their own decisions to staff down, some of them because they found efficiencies and reducing the noise of incident management, so they don't need as many people. And others is just culturally people just leaving. So there's a ton of attrition and churn, and the talent component is really, really critical. It's at its apex right now with cybersecurity, but it happens everywhere, right? It happened during COVID with normal jobs, people realizing that they had options that didn't require them to do certain things. But the levels of stress at the SOC level, incident management level, to kind of note Dr. Tammy Hollis and a lot of the work she's been doing, is, you're in first responder incident management mentality all the time, right? So how do you kind of work around that and communicate that up to management that, by the way, we're understaffed, or we don't have the right tools, or we don't have the right resources, and we're going to continue to see this burnout and a lot of other things. So it's a lot of that kind of communication that needs to be addressed or just really brought up so that folks can focus on how to make things easier. Not easy, but easier.
Yeah, and I know Dr. Hollis as well. She and I recently worked together on a speaking engagement, actually. So it's
she's
great
awesome.
that you know her.
She's incredible.
And I've worked with a ton of DFIR firms over the years, and certainly when you're responding to ransomware engagements constantly, it's just a giant grind. And I'm sure, it's the same way on the internal side. It's just not the same type of incident constantly. What about the talent gap right now? Like, obviously, this market's a little bit different than we were in, say, 2-3 years ago. But do you believe the talent gap is real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
Oh boy, Pete, you're opening up a Pandora's box. You said we only had how much time? All right, I'll try to make this quick. I can guarantee you, whatever role you have, there's at least 50 to 250 people that are perfectly qualified, not overqualified, not underqualified, but perfectly qualified for it. The challenge becomes the process that's being used to select them, right? So we have to get away from the cookie cutter keywords. We have to get away from the cookie cutter junior SOC analyst with a CISP certification. We have to get away from those kind of things and really start to address what are you actually looking for, right, in that role, number one. Number two, are you open to being able to pull in the right folks to do that job that may not be a match 100% with the company or otherwise, because you need a little bit of the diversity. And then on the flip side, we need to do better. We really need to do a lot better in warning everyone who wants to get into cybersecurity about the $10, $20, $30,000 boot camps. Right. Those are cute. I get it. I'm sure there's been successes with folks who've been in them and gotten a job or been in them and tied, their experience to it. But guess what? Majority of the time you're left with a really big bill and no job because of the way that the market is right now. So the talent is guaranteed to be there. The new talent is guaranteed to be there with whatever program or certifications you're going to use. But it's really understanding on the flip side to say who's the right talent and how do you best approach that. And it's not easy, right? The whole hiring process needs to kind of look at it and say, what kind of person do we need? What kind of diversity do we need in experience, right? I'm not hitting the DE&I thing yet, right? Just in experience. Give prime example, just on a call with a colleague of mine who I met through networking. They have 20 plus years of experience as a police officer and a sergeant. They've worked with the FBI. They've worked on forensics. They've done a lot of things. They're hands-on in cybersecurity, so they know Metasploit. They've got everything, and they keep up with it. They're waiting for their investigator license, right? So they can be a private investigator. Tons of experience. Goes into job interviews, great presentation, no ego, still can't get a job. I'm like, overqualified or, not the right fit. I'm like, why wouldn't you want to bring in somebody who has FBI experience, traceability, all these other pieces and hands-on experience to any role? I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of person I want in my job, right? And has the investigative license, or pending, right? Like, that's gold, right? But guess what? Not a cultural fit or, not the right experience. I'm like, not the right experience. I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? So literally over like at least 2 or 3 roles. He's like, I don't understand. And I've said, all right, let's go through a mock interview. Knocks it out of the park. I'm like, shit, I'd hire you if I had a role. But, so you see the flip side where somebody has experience, has the drive, has everything else, but just not landing, and again, I've talked to this person long enough that I know that they're not choking in the middle of an interview, right? So
Sure.
Where's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, it's one of a few things. It's biases. It's a people and process problem. It's definitely not a technology problem, but I think the ATS is a convenient scapegoat for a lot of folks. But in my experience, and this could be, I guess, colored by the fact that I'm an external recruiter. So when I work with a company, they're very, very, very specific in exactly what they're looking for. But generally, they're looking for somebody that's done that same exact job at a direct competitor yesterday. If somebody's done it in the past, not good enough. If somebody's capable of doing it but hasn't done it yet, not good enough. If they haven't had that title before, not good enough. If they haven't worked at a similar company, not good enough. So they just have this very narrow sense of what an ideal fit looks like. But it's so funny when I talk to hiring managers on this podcast, they're often talking more about intangibles than the exact experience they're hiring for. They want self-motivation, intellectual curiosity, strong work ethic, all these things that they're not even on a resume. So, right. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well, or do you think it's something else?
I would love to meet some of those hiring managers. I'm not quite seeing them, and I'm not trying to be biased on hiring and everything else. But to your point, the folks who come to you, when they give you the exact litany of what they're looking, that's perfect, right? But the education of, okay, I get you want the 1-to-1 match 100% on exactly, but what you're going to miss out on are the things you didn't think of. I'll give you a primary example. I was hiring for a role. I'll leave it at that. And I was looking through a few resumes, and I was like, okay, I'm not really sure. And then I was just about to put an offer on one person. I said, wait a minute, let me go back to this one resume. Something resonated with this resume. The presentation, and I get past the presentation issues because I do a lot of coaching on things like that. I'm like, no. Okay, let me get past that. Let me read deeper into what this person actually did. And then I realized what it was. And when they hear this, they're going to be like, you did it again, Mel. I said, okay, that's what drew me. So about 2 or 3 roles back, they had a role for about 6-7 years, which I said to myself, I was like, this is the person I need to hire. Had nothing to do with IT and security. You know what they were, Pete? For 6 or 7 years, they were a professional magician. And I said to myself, for the role that I need them for, which is to coordinate, to work on logistical projects, to reach out to different groups, pull people together from an IT and a security standpoint, I was like, let's walk through the logic of what it takes to be a magician. Okay, you've got to have discipline. You've got to know systems and process, sleight of hand, communication, reading the crowd. I'm like, boom, made an offer, worked with them for 2-3 years. Right.
That's great. Yeah. Right. A lot of people don't draw those parallels. I think that there's not as much looking for transferable skills as maybe there should be.
Thank you.
But I think in this economic environment, when there are so many people in the market, the tendency is to say, okay, well, we just got 2,000 applicants to this job posting. Why don't we hire the person that's done this exact same job yesterday? Right. It's an easy way, I think, to hire, or it doesn't require much thought, but it's not necessarily the most optimal way, because the most optimal way would be digging deeper, maybe taking a little longer, maybe interviewing more people to get to the person that has that particular set of intangibles that's going to set them up for success, versus just saying, all right, check. They have this experience. They worked at this company. We're good to go. In my experience, some of it too is not poorly trained recruiters. That's part of it. Understaffed talent acquisition teams, I think, is a part of it, especially in this environment. In some cases, it's, hiring managers being too busy or saying they're too busy to review job descriptions, to catch things like the CISSP for the junior SOC analyst. Obviously, you've advised a ton of companies. How do you think some of this stuff happens where they're making these mistakes, or where that CISSP ends up on that junior job description? Where do you think it's breaking down?
You hit it with all of those, whether I fully agree or disagree. I'm not creating a rant. I'm not discounting the level of effort that companies have to make in the whole hiring process. But there definitely has to be an assertive, purposeful effort being put in. So if you're bringing someone in, and I say this to a lot of folks, and this is where I get the slippery slope, HR is the culture builder, right? whoever they bring in that makes it through the process, it has to be aligned with the right mentality, the right culture, the right diversity, the right everything. Okay. So if you're hiring, the cookie cutter has to fit these 10 pieces, then you're going to get into the same scenario that happened when a big company decided to use AI for their, right? Because they base it off the existing hire. So guess what? You're going to get exactly the same over and over and over again, right? They ended up hiring men from a specific level of education, blah, 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 blah. And guess what? Or at least that process would have led them that way. And they unbundled that. But if you're not looking at the other essential pieces, like you said, what the hiring or HR folks are looking for, something that makes them stand out a little bit, right? Something that makes them think differently. Crazy concept that you want somebody to think differently when you bring them into the team. Then you're not going to find the right fit. Now, that's going to sound like a pitch, but it's not. When you do the assessments on your existing teams and you have, let's say, 2 roles that are open, you have to do something like a global disc assessment to see where you're front loaded, where your gap is, and what other traits and talents you may need to bring to the team, right? Or train the team over that way so that you can actually get a better balance. And there's 5, 6, 7, 8 different categories that you can find a balance in a cultural piece to get the kind of output, the kind of motivation, the kind of vision, the kind of psychological safety that you can get. But if you don't do any of those kind of assessments and you're just hiring cookie cutter, you hit 9 out of these 10, you're hired, or you have to hit these 10. That's cute. That's great. I would never be hired by any company, right? I've been in 3 financial service institutions, 3 media agencies, CPG, manufacturing, and a partridge in a pear tree. And I say that all the time, right? But the whole thing, I would never be hired. Why? Because I don't fit that mold, right? I'm not in manufacturing, and I'm not in financial services, and I'm not in this, and media. But guess what? I was able to kind of push the conversation into, here's my experience. This is what I bring to the table. This is where I stand out, right? And then I was hired, right? And obviously the working the connections, right? To bypass the 2,000, who do I know in that company? Who do I know that knows somebody in that company? And I keep 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? I don't care. I will work the process if I really want to work in that company. I think that's the right job, right? But that's not easy to do. It takes a lot of effort, and who knows who, right? I just made 4 connection recommendations for one of my colleagues, right? I said, reach out to them. I'm not gonna do it for them. I say, reach out to them, tell them Mel insisted that we connect, and then work the process from there, right? That's how the last 3, 4 jobs that I've had have been. Right. I still apply to jobs. I have hundreds of jobs that I've applied to since I decided to do my big move and everything 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe a handful actually ended up with an actual call, right? Not even an interview, because they didn't put their salary or the requirements. Like, no, I'm not moving to to Dubai, sorry, or somewhere else, Florida. Anyway, and the others, they were like, oh yeah, we'd love for you to run this global blah, blah, blah. We're paying $125K. I'm like, you have how many employees? I'm like, you want me to do what? I'm like, no offense to anybody out there. I've got 30 plus years of experience, right? I got 3 kids in college. Like, you need to level up. So that's why I work with folks like Cyber Ascend and a lot of other folks to say, hey, we need the industry to level up and to kind of like recalibrate on a few things. But the most important thing is to be able to get to someone like you who says, by the way, do they realize, anybody who comes in, I'm sure you're recalibrating them, right? You're like, yeah, let's look at the market. Right. Let's look at where it should be and what you're asking for, because you're basically, I've been in jobs where I had 2 major titles and 1 major salary. Right. But I accepted that because I knew the benefit of running, both sides of the fence. But making sure you've got the right folks behind you to say, hey, from a talent, a diversity, from, hey, you need to look at this person. I know they don't fit your 10, they only fit 4. But if you don't hire this person, you're going to miss out on some of the most incredible energy, the incredible pieces that you need in your team. But you can't do that without an assessment and without knowing the inside of things.
Yeah, and I would imagine personality filters into the team composition conversation quite a bit, and building a company culture, a team culture. I could see where there might be a tension between having a cohesive team and having everybody rowing in the same direction, but then also getting diversity of thought and people with different personalities. How do you walk that tightrope, or advise your clients to walk that tightrope?
Right. So on a rowing team, there is precision, and there's height, there's strength, you absolutely have to toe that line. Like there's no, like I can't be on a rowing team, right? Like, one, I'd probably, I'd have to train for like 8 years before I could even be competitive, right? Again, I'm not a fit. Right. So if you've got someone who's got the discipline, who's got the strength, who's got the height, right? Because obviously you need to have a lot of pull and a lot of other pieces, right? My short, stubby legs aren't going to get me there, right? Yes, you need that. But guess what? Cybersecurity isn't that. Most jobs aren't that, right? I don't need to be a leader. I don't need to be 6 feet tall, right? I don't need to have blonde hair, blue eyes, right? But guess what? That's what the bias goes towards. Right? No offense to anybody who's out there, right? But if I come in and I have the energy, the drive, most of the experience, 80% of the experience, 60% of the experience, but I can come in and have a different impact on the culture of the team, how we do things, have ideas, you might want to consider me, right? You might want to consider that candidate who's like, wait a minute, there's a gem here. I just need to invest 10% more time than normal, and I can guarantee they're gonna walk on water for the rest of their career here in this role. But without that time, without the right resources, without you being, as a leader, this is the most important thing that I walk everybody through. As a leader, if you're not purposeful about the time that you put in to develop your team, or you don't have the time, you're in the wrong scenario, right? You need to manage up to say, I need to be purposeful about elevating my teams. I don't have the time. If you're a CISO practitioner, you need to level up on how to be a CISO leader, right, for your teams. And if that means you've got to backfill and hire, you've got to pull people from IT, you've got to pull people from marketing who just got their CISM or whatever, sure, pull them in. Right. Just take advantage of any resources that you have internally so that you can actually delegate and level them up so that you're actually becoming the leader that they need. And you're then addressing things up to, laterally and with your teams to level them up. So it's a purposeful, and probably fourth time I said that word on this call, because that's what most folks don't do. They just accept the grind. They accept the pieces. But when you become purposeful, then you can talk to the HR manager about the exact kind of role. Then you can look at it to see, Honeywell, when you include a junior SOC analyst, CISP, I'm like it just doesn't work, right? You need to have full visibility and own that whole process, as well as own the fact that this is your team. Even if they're remote, if they're offshore, whatever it is, it's still your team. Just saying, I get riled up on this stuff.
Yeah, well, to have a process, I think that's key. Having the right controls in place to QA a job rec before it goes out, so somebody can catch, because you have to figure that the vast majority of hiring managers, and the ones that don't, I don't know how to help them, but the vast majority of hiring managers are going to know that CISSP is not an appropriate certification for a SOC analyst.
Right.
So the only way I could think that it might get through is HR's just writing it, and they're being tasked with doing so without any oversight from the hiring team or from an experienced recruiter who understands security. I think a lot of times, especially in larger organizations, you get generalist recruiters who don't necessarily have that specialty. And so if there is an unrealistic requirement or something silly like the CISSP for a junior job, they don't know enough to push back on that. So it ends up getting pushed out the door when nobody experienced has viewed the job description or pushed back on anything unrealistic. And then a lot of times too, I think it's just a location mismatch these days, especially with companies going back to return to office and everybody wanting those remote jobs that are becoming fewer and farther between. There may only be a handful of people in that location with that skill set, and chances are most of those folks are happily employed already. I guess what are your thoughts on the RTO versus remote thing? Are you seeing that making any waves at all?
I love so again, the world collapsed. Was it March 2020? Right? May 2020, whatever it was, it collapsed, right? And the industry had to adjust, and everybody started to find, all kinds of realizations. Right? I don't have to be in the office. This, and the other. Okay. And I thought about this because I saw it on the list of questions. And I'm like, I hate this conversation because I don't get to get a ton of shit about it. But okay, I will tell you right now. There's two things that throw me off. I love my teams, whether they're local or remote, right? Like, another country, remote, the old school mentality. Number two, I want somebody else to pay for my coffee, right? I spent thousands of dollars in the last 4+ years buying my own coffee here at home, right? So what does that mean? That means that from a team cultural standpoint, when I can actually see across the way or kind of be in the presence of the team, I can help elevate them and I can kind of block for them. Now I do that remotely. Okay, check. What I was like, how do I define this? Younger teams, I say, get your ass in the office. Learn how to work with people in the present, in real life. If you're talking about DFIR, you're talking about real like hardcore SOC analysts. I don't give a shit where you work, right? Because guess what? You don't want to talk to anybody, right? You're deep in traceability. You're deep in right. Fine. But if you have the opportunity, get in the office, right? And obviously, if you've got, and I know some groups that have a mix of both, the local, I kind of want to go back into the office. I kind of do for a long time, right? Because that's where you can have fun and be purposeful about when you make that time aside, you can build that culture and that relationship, right? It's a little hard remotely, but you can still do it. Still a little hard. You can't just go out. Hey, let's go out to dinner afterwards. Hey, let's go out and get a burger for lunch, right? You can't do that. Right? That's cute that you're eating your Subway at your desk, and I'm 2,000 miles away and I'm eating Subway at my desk. But and by the way, you guys Subway, you should sponsor Talent Gap Fireside Chat. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of a huge proponent. Now take that same conversation, because I love this. I was like, take the same conversation on how do you one job posting, 2,000 applicants. Guess what? Guarantee you could chisel that down by making hybrid. Work with me here. Say, must be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. Right? You're gonna get some people who would consider moving, and you can. A lot of areas have a lot of great talent nearby, even if it's only the 5, right? But here's the thing: if you say hybrid, and you find the right candidate that you're like, screw it, we'll just make it remote, you could change that. But if you say remote, you're going to have to weed through 2,000 freaking resumes, 3,000, 10,000 resumes. But if you say hybrid, must be in the office, right? In Pensacola, blah, blah, blah. You're going to get people like, I'm not going in. Perfect. Great. Then that means that you're, in Maine, and you're only going to get this kind of job. Well, guess what? If I were looking at that, I was like, you know what? It's hybrid. I'm in California, but I really love this role and I really love the company and I'd love to figure out how I can get in there. I'm going to submit anyway. Don't disqualify them because they're in another state, right? Get them in to agree to that and then reposition it as a remote only job. right? Because that's part of the noise that the HR folks are living through. And then that's why they exclude by keywords and they exclude by this. Don't do that, right? Don't. My resume isn't 18 pages to include every keyword that you're going to be looking for, right? DFIR is not on my resume. Well, one, because I don't, I like to sleep, right? But also, so if that's what they're looking for, I get excluded immediately. Well, that's Q, right? So now you're just going to get the lucky person who included that in there, whether they're qualified or not, right? So work the process on how you refine if you're doing that kind of hiring, and then look at the actual cultural piece for that person. What do they have to bring to the table? What kind of experience? I'll tell you, my colleague, former police, sergeant, FBI, I'm like, how is somebody not finding you and saying you need to work with us? So I gave him my contacts at the FBI. I gave him my contacts here in LA. I gave him contacts in where they live. I was going to say where they live, but I can't do that. Right. And I'm like, reach out to these folks. Somebody's going to have to, make a connection for you. But the hiring process absolutely has to change. And I know there's companies out there that are doing the AI thing and, removing the tone and everything else. That's great. That's great. As long as you're doing the rest of that. How do you, right? But getting someone like you, who's a champion for a person, that's money, right? Because you're like, listen, I know you just got 2,000 applications. Send me the 10 that you're looking at, and I'm gonna match them up against 2 or 3 that I'm gonna recommend. Then I'm gonna tell you where your pitfalls may be. Something like that is money. So yes, work with a recruiter, even if it costs you money, people. I get it. But guess what? Depending on that role that you're looking for, it could actually save you a lot more money in the future, because if they're not happy, they're going to churn. There's going to be attrition. You're going to build the wrong culture or a culture that may not be acceptable. Let me rephrase that. I always reframe.
Totally agree. Well, and I think a lot of these issues too can be solved just by performing outbound recruiting. And I'm not sure why this happened, but I don't know. I see a ton of job posts on LinkedIn. I see a ton of people talking about how many jobs they've applied to. And, if each one's getting 1,000 or more applicants, what sense does it make to have that much noise to the amount of signal you're getting? It's just a waste of everybody's time. It's a waste of the applicant's time. It's a waste of the job poster's time. Why don't you spend a little bit of time?
I'll tell you why, Pete, because you're in a $250,000 contract or $500,000 contract with LinkedIn. You got to use those job postings.
Yeah. They're pretty ruthless over there from my experience. But yeah, no, I think a lot of the hiring issues in our field specifically would evaporate if we had, 1, better trained recruiters, 2, a focus on outbound sourcing, quote unquote, versus inbound fielding of applications. And if every hiring manager had a little bit of oversight over their job postings and their actual job descriptions, I think that would poof. The majority of hiring problems would go away overnight. There's some things you can't fix, like if the job needs to be on site for whatever reason. Again, that's where outbound comes in, though. If you reach out to somebody and you mention in your outreach, hey, this is on site, if they're not interested, they're not going to respond to you. Whereas if they are, then you have a really good chance of getting that person on board, and you're not wasting anybody's time. Whereas I think a lot of people they'll apply to jobs that they're hoping that they can convince the hiring team to be remote if it's hybrid or on site. So everybody's just kind of shooting their shot, hoping for the best, which
you miss every shot you don't take. I get that, but also you've got to come to the table with something more than just, trying to take the shot, right? You've got, if you don't have the uniform and if you don't have the right sneakers, you're not prepped to be able to take that shot. That's some of the stuff you need to go back to. But you're absolutely right. The process needs to change a bit, but also this hiring process of weeks to months is insane. Don't get me started. There was a role that was offered to me, and I said, I just want to let you know. I knew the person who was hiring. I said, I just want to let you know, I'm not spending months interviewing. I'm like, if we can lock everything in 2 weeks of interviews, bring me in for 2 days, put me in a chair with a spotlight, interrogate me. I'm not doing weeks upon weeks upon weeks upon weeks. We were able to get through fast track through that. The number of stories that I hear about 4, 5, 6, 7 week long weekly type of interviews with another group and another this, and I'm like, do you really need to have that many people involved in order to figure out whether or not the person's technically or culturally qualified to be in the organization? If you do, rethink that process. If you need that many people to give a thumbs up and a check mark, rethink your process. All right. I'm calling it out for the whole industry. I get senior level roles, board level roles, boards, roles that report up. Get it. I love it. You do you, right? But if it takes you more than 3 to 4 weeks to get through that process, then you're not ready to hire. You're just not, right? Everybody needs to be on point and needs to be like a regimen of, you have to make this time. Thursdays between 9 and 12, every senior leader that has to have an input needs to be available so that we can get it done in 2 to 3, maybe 4 weeks, not this 2-month cycle. I get the ghosting. I get the number of feedbacks. I get all that kind of stuff, number of times that you have to get back to people and the automated systems I get all that, right? So ghosting, yes, it sucks, but it happens, right? But the process itself, it's either fit or it's not. Right? Like, do the background check the first week. That way you can clear at least that hurdle, right? I honestly, if someone were to tell me, hey, I need you to fly out here and I need you to be here for the whole week as an interview, I'm there.
If it meant literally less time overall, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Will you have a decision by the end of the week? And it's going to be 2 other people there? Absolutely. Sure. Or 2 other folks that you're interviewing? Absolutely. Right. Interrogate me all day long. You want me to try to do a cartwheel? Sure. Right. Whatever, underwater basket weaving exam? Sure. Right. But to kind of punt week after week into yet another, that's a little tough. I get the schedule, I get the travel, I get the vacations, but got to be a little bit ready to be able to hire. And if, yet another person needs to chime in, maybe that's a cultural clash where, too many personalities have an input.
For sure. Yeah. And you have to make it a priority. As you'd mentioned, schedules aren't always going to cooperate, but you're going to lose the best candidates the longer the process drags out. I think often there's a sense that, this is a key hire. We have to be especially careful. They're going to have a huge impact on our culture. So we need to have as many people sign off on this person as possible because it is such a key hire. But what you end up doing is the people that would be the best fits, they check out the earliest. And then the people that are just willing to tolerate the most, they're the ones that end up at the end of the process. And you're not getting the best people that way. How do you think this happens where we get these insane interview processes or too many hands in the cookie jar? Where do you think that stems from?
You're going to get me in trouble, Pete. Damn you, I wasn't expecting this one. I've answered this one before, but all right. So I get there's a buy-in. I get that certain leaders drive a specific way, that not everyone loves a passive aggressive or loves this, that, the other, or whatever the personality kind of context is. I'll be honest, a lot of the folks that I've talked to are glad that they had to meet with so many people because they got a real feeling for the culture, right? Super competitive, siloed, so it's every permutation of the kinds of potential places, not making assumptions, just generalizations that you may not want to work in, right? Right. And again, it could be scheduling. It could just be vacations. It could be, when you're talking about companies that are in Europe, it could be, holidays, it could be summer. It could be, so I'm not trying to pigeonhole the whole industry into this, but when you have so many folks that have to have input into a thumbs up or thumbs down, and they all continue to kind of extend that, one, they may not be ready for that hire, and two, forget about losing the best talent. And I'm not saying that the talent that you end up with is not as good, but if somebody has a level of confidence in any level of role, right? Obviously, entry level are willing to absorb the most pain because they need that role. But if you've got somebody who's got experience and has a job, let's go to that one, has a job, but they really love what you're doing, and you run them through that ringer, they'd be like, I don't have to actually leave. I don't have to try this hard, right? So, and guess what? They're probably trying the same thing and trying just as hard or trying something different somewhere else. So guess what? Whoever comes in with the right pitch, with the right culture, with the right everything else, tag, they're it. You're going to miss out. So I'm not saying expedite it and make it faster and do that, but you got to have a sense of urgency to be able to say, is this the right person? And it's easy to qualify or disqualify, right? Number one, ask me for 10 referrals immediately. Right? Have somebody else vouch for me, right? Then you could say, well, you know what? I don't kind of believe 5 out of the 10 people because they were just, they sound like they were paid to vouch for this guy. Okay, bye. Right? Like I'm okay with that. Right? So the process. And again, large companies have it really, really hard because now you've got to align with all of your current roles. You've got to kind of realign, and maybe especially in cybersecurity. There's a definite set of reorgs that are needed across the whole industry to find the real gaps in talent, but also the real gaps in the cultural building, right? The psychological safety. So it's a bit of work, but without other leadership calling it out, without the CHROs and the learning and development folks and everybody else calling out, we need to do better or we need to do different. Let me rephrase that. Reframe. We need to do different in order to kind of get the best out of all this. Just not going to happen. You're going to get the same, it's, I think it was March of the Wooden Soldiers, where I think they were all running. I was like, da, 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 da. It's like you're just going to get the same drudgery of process.
Yeah, I tend to see the interview process as kind of a microcosm of the organization as a whole. Generally, if the process is lengthy and tough to get things scheduled, you're probably going to have a lot of red tape in your company. Whereas if it's easy and quick and everybody seems pretty agile and excited, and that's usually a good sign. That said, obviously there are going to be some differences between startups and larger companies. Traditionally, I've worked with a lot of startups where if they're not agile, that's a red flag when a startup's not agile. If they have too many hands in the cookie jar and there's still 50 employees, yeah, not great. But if it's a Fortune 50, then maybe it's a little bit more understandable.
I'll tell you right now, working with somebody like you and all the other recruiters and everything else, it's really easy, right? Let's say it was fast tracked in 2 weeks. Guess what? It's not going to take you more than a month to figure out this guy's an idiot. They don't know what they're doing. I got told about, like culturally they're toxic. Guess what? You don't get paid based on your contract, right? So the company has nothing to lose except a month of looking at what they don't want, right? So why not look at that kind of process where you're like, okay, they fit the bill, they fit this. 3 people that they interviewed with internally, the key 3 people that have the most cultural impact or the most diverse groups really liked him. Let's get them in. Let's get them in. Let me rephrase that, right? Okay. Guess what? They don't work out. They don't work out. Yes, you spent onboarding, you spent this. Guess what? That's great, cute. But you also were able to build something that come in quickly, do assessments of your environment based on what they know. And if they didn't work out, they didn't work out. But guess what could happen? They could be the happiest person on the planet and they're shooting rainbows out of places that we can, I can't say this, I'm trying to keep it clean, and have a transformative change across your whole organization. Crazy talk. But you're never going to get them if you're going to be 2 months into 3 months into an interview process. Don't get me wrong. NSA, all these, larger global roles. Is perfect. You take your time, but just know time is of the essence when it comes to hiring.
For sure. Yeah. And at the end of the day, hiring is a risk calculation. And I think everybody wants to mitigate their risk to some degree. Just like security, it's about risk reduction, but you're never going to completely eliminate the risk of hiring somebody. So, and I'm a huge fan of the Pareto principle. I think if you get 80% of results from the first 20% of your effort, focus on that 20% and getting the right people on board. Don't try to eke out every last optimization and end up destroying your whole team because you're interviewing 100 people in the process.
Yep.
Do the best you can with the resources that you have. Understand that, good talent is hard to find and they're not going to wait around in most cases. And if they do, great. But you have to understand that you're also taking a risk by having so many people checking off on a single person that could be transformative to your organization. It's like, which risk would you rather take, I guess, at the end of the day?
Thank you. The one thing I will say, and I love that, the 80-20, the Pareto, I tell folks with almost everything, whether you're starting a business, creating a new product, your resume, an article you're writing, team, MVE. And you're like, well, okay. Minimum viable effort, right? What is going to be the safest 80% zone that I can get into with as minimum checkpoints and as minimal pieces that I need in order to get to there? Because guess what? I can make up the other 20% somehow, right? I can level them up. I can, cross-train them. I can figure something out. But if that 80% is so it's so solid, right? I need that 80%. And I need that now. I need that energy. I need the experience, right? And it's just, you have to me, it's an MVE where I am only going to focus on like the really, 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 really core pieces. That 20%, I can work on that, right? Even if it costs me time to develop them up or crossover, or I get you've only been in manufacturing, but I love what you did there. Guess what? We're gonna walk you through what you need to do in financial services, right? Or we're gonna walk you through all the other pieces because what I need is that skill or that energy or how you came across or how you were able to build something or some diversity program that you use to help educate and elevate within that org. Yeah, I need that on my team. Right. So don't look at just the you said, the 10 out of 10 or the 100% match. You're going to be there for a long, long, long time trying to find that unicorn.
For sure. Yeah. And it takes a lot of resources to spend that much time trying to identify somebody when, say you got somebody who's an 8 out of 10 and you got them on in a week versus, you hold out 6 months for that person that's a 10 out of 10. How long do you think it's actually going to take that person to get the remaining 2 points that's hired next week? Probably not that long. So,
right.
If you focus on, I think if you prioritize what somebody absolutely must need to know on day one and figure out what those skills are, those are your must-have requirements on your job description. That's what you interview for. And then obviously you interview for the soft skills. You could put the soft skills intangibles on the job description, but in my experience, it doesn't do a whole lot of good because everybody says they want somebody self-motivated, just like everybody says they're results-oriented, detail-oriented, all that good stuff.
Right.
So
team player. But here's the other piece with that. Now you just said a prime example, 6 months to fill this role. Now, in cybersecurity, that's like 60 years, right? I need this now. 6 months? 6 months. The pressure that's being put on the team after you've rah-rahed and got the budget and told the team that we're going to have a new hire. Now you've got 6 months without filling that role. The team's going to look at you like you're a damn liar, like you bamboozled them to work hard during the interview process, right? So you don't have that kind of time and levity and excuse to say, it's 6 months. No, No, like 6 days, right? 6 business days. You should have a pretty damn clear view into who you want to hire, make that offer, and then that second week, bring them in. It's really not that hard. If you need help, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Pete, but it's really not that hard. I did hundreds of job interviews for a startup that went public and was it's still very big, like 20 plus years ago. Hundreds of interviews because they were expanding and they were growing into new business lines. And guess what? You couldn't get past my phone screening. You couldn't get in. Right. And I listened to tone, affliction, everything else. This is before video. This is just a phone call. I heard people flipping pages. Right. I heard, for technical, then I heard one was out of this world. I heard somebody who needed to actually translate what they wanted to say. Right. So, but I've also heard people who were so passionate. And one of the questions you had is something along the lines of how do you kind of identify like one, key candidate? I have one key question. I'm going to give this to the world now. I have one key question that I ask during a job interview that is the moneymaker on whether or not that person's a cultural fit. One question. That's it. One Pete, right? I don't ask them about their certifications. I don't ask them, anything else. One question. And I stepped through each of their roles. And I said, hey, with the last role you just had or your current role that you're in, walk me through your proudest moment or your biggest accomplishment. Then I stop and, Pete, as you can tell, I love to talk, right? But I don't. I just say, walk me through your proudest moment or your proudest project.
Yeah, and open-ended questions like that are such a good idea of assessing communication skills and, like you said, what they're passionate about, which is going to lead you to a determination probably if they're going to be a fit for your team. So absolutely.
Right. I've thrown so many people off, right? Because I'll give you the 3 examples. First person is like, well, in my current role, I'm like, no. Walk me through, like they go through the bullet point job description of what they did. Then I get the person who like rattles off and has trained themselves to rattle off. Yeah. And I did this and I did this and we were able to do it. I'm like, no. I'm like, I want your proudest moment, your biggest accomplishment. Right. And then you get the third one where they're like, and I've heard everything from, I saved Susie from the well, like, completely unrelated to their job function to, it was, I wasn't even in charge of the global implementation for this ERP system, but I was able to course correct and do data mapping. And, and the proudest moment was when my team was elevated. I was like, I've just heard some phenomenal stories, but guess what? I'll give you a prime example. I had a young developer, and this is what I loved. Right? I had a young developer that I needed at an e-com job that I had. I was managing a lot of stuff. And he had used technology that I knew, and I knew there was a major pitfall in the 2 technologies that he had included in there. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna see how he handles this one. So I kind of walked through. I said, what was your proudest moment working with with this tech? Super shy. I don't want to call it out, but they were super shy. You could tell this was maybe their second job, right? And it was like they weren't very strong in interviewing. The second I asked them about that role, that technology, and what was their proudest moment, or what was the one piece that they found? Holy shit! This kid like exploded, and we went into like Ferengi speak because he was just like, oh yeah. Blah, blah, blah. And he just rattled, and you could see the passion and what the hooks he had to do and the back end and the this. And I was like, in my head, I was like, you're hired. Right. Because he just brought it to the table. He brought his passion. He let go of the fact he had to wear a suit, hated wearing a suit right after we hired him, hated wearing this. So he's like, oh, that was my dad's suit. I hate wearing suits. Right. But the second I asked him about that was the goal. Right. That was like, that's what I need to hire for that. Right. That's all. One question. What was your proudest moment or project? That's all I ask them.
Yeah. And that's a great way to figure out what motivates somebody by what they're proudest of. So, and that's what I spend a lot of time assessing as a recruiter is what gets somebody out of bed in the morning, what motivates them,
Right.
what
Right.
makes them proud. These are things that are, I think, deeply rooted in our psychology that make us, you know, the best fits possible for certain types of jobs and definitely not for others. Like I've discovered myself, I'm very results oriented. So if there's a company that values anything over results, then I'm not going to be very happy there, because I'm about, judge me by the fruits of my labor and not anything else. But obviously not everybody's wired that way. Well, we're actually coming up on time here, Mel. So
just real quick, anybody who tries to game the system, if I'm hiring, I'm going to ask you the most technical questions on the planet if you answer that question smoothly. Sorry.
There we go. You have been warned. Well, just one last question for you, Mel. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Yes. In cybersecurity and in high level stress jobs is the toxic burnout, right? Which is why, again, when I was in Vegas, I made sure I made at least one of the two Mind Over Cyber events, which is why I made sure to connect in with Peter over at Cyber Minds. Being able to address the resource issues, the leadership elevation issues, the demand on the cybersecurity teams, which is why, Dr. Tammy and I and a bunch of other folks like Dr. Dustin and everybody else are trying to work together to figure out how do we keep getting this message out there? How do we educate from a leadership standpoint across all, not just IT and cybersecurity, across all leadership, to educate them on what it takes to run, everything from MGM to the CS, I'm not even going to say the whole word, right? The impact that had on the whole industry. Guess what? What about the teams that had to recover from that on IT and cybersecurity? Talk about the impact on marketing and sales, right? That stress that they felt is every day for cybersecurity and IT. So that's the kind of piece that needs to be continuously brought up, is how do we help? How are we purposeful about helping that scenario when you're understaffed, under-resourced? So if your CISO says, I need 2 more SOC analysts, or I need to grow my engineering, or I need to grow my DFIR, please listen to them, right? Please listen to them. It's super, super critical. Or get them the training that they need so they can elevate up and find more resources within the organization. Obviously, both of us can probably pitch in and help them with that. But I'm doing it out of a passion for the stuff, I was going to curse again, that I've had to deal with and seen, and my colleagues. But, that's the message that I want to leave everybody with.
Well, that's great. And a great place to end. Mel, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
LinkedIn, you can find me on all the others, but LinkedIn is probably the best. etc.limited, mrtech.com, all over the place.
Great. Well, we will put your profile up here. So appreciate your time, Mel, awesome. And thanks, everybody. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.